Hello, I'm Ros Parker. I'm the principal of Southend Adult Community College, and today I'm going to take you through the quality assuring the impact of your digital provision. So the first part is just a reminder really that this is about the Digital ACE project. So Digital ACE has been designed to support colleagues in the adult community education sector who can then develop their next stage in their journey towards continued improvement and developing their capability and capacity so that they can enhance their offer to the learners while still remaining learner-centred and keeping that high quality approach to adult learning that I know you're all very proud of currently as well. So the purpose of the session, basically what we're trying to achieve is by the end of this session, you should be able to identify actions that will enable you to evidence the impact of your digital curriculum, the impact it has on building knowledge and skills, which is so critical in the work in which we do. It will also help you to consider approaches that enable you to demonstrate the impact your remote learning is having on learners' progress, and also developing their interests and enabling them to achieve their aspirations. It's also going to help by letting you look at how you capture any impact that your offer is having on learners' health and well-being in the current context. So critically important to recognise the contribution you are making to learners' health and well-being, and equally that is something that Ofsted is interested in too. So what I've been doing is running polls in the actual sessions, and what I thought might be helpful is if you could just spend a moment now looking at how confidently you feel you can undertake these activities. And it's a quick reflection, just so we can start to think around how we build up that confidence in yourself and in others. So how confidently can you evidence that your curriculum is responding to the changing needs? And by that, I mean on a scale of 0, where you're not very confident at all, to really confident and you've got this. So just gauge yourself on that parameter for the first one. On the second one, remote learning is successfully building knowledge and skills. How confident are you in evidencing that? Again, 0, not very, and 10, you've got this. Have a little gauge, where are you in that spectrum? And the final point is, how easy has it been to support learners' health and well-being remotely? Again, not very easy at all, to really simple and absolutely got it. So gauge yourself on those just as a quick reference point for yourself, because I can absolutely guarantee that you will have been putting an awful lot in place, but you're constantly looking for the next thing to be able to do. And now will give you a time to step back and actually demonstrate the impact you are having already, and reassure you that the steps you've been taking are exactly what Ofsted are suggesting we should be looking for as well. So let's just go through that as we look at the Education Inspection Framework judgments. Today we're only focusing on impact. So by impact, it's in the delivery of our digital provision. What impact are we having on attainment, qualifications and assessment? We all know how challenging that's been, but what's the impact of the interventions we've put into place on improving attainment, securing attainment and qualifications and assessments, and equally what progress are learners making? And in that progress, there's a whole range of things dependent on the subject area we're looking at. Also, what impact have we had on the building of knowledge, and that skills development can transfer into their next stage of their own development, whether that's work or further learning? And then equally, what are the destinations as a result of the interventions we've been putting into place, and how do we capture the impact of our interventions on that? So, okay. What do we mean when we consider a digital curriculum? I thought it might be useful just to reflect on some of the things that Ofsted are talking about in terms of what remote education means and what that actually, because we use lots and lots of different terminology, but this is what Ofsted have captured really. So Where remote education is a broad term. So this is learning that happens outside the classroom. And this, as they're referring to it, is quite often where the teacher is not present in the same location as the students. Digital remote education, often known as online learning, is remote learning delivered through different digital technologies. Blended learning, mix of face-to-face and remote methods. What you may have done when you started to reintroduce learners back in to the classroom compared to perhaps remote education and digital when we were in lockdown, and as we are, as we've been in a lockdown situation. And the final one is really about this live interaction, where the material is prepared by the teacher and accessed later on. So the one above it in the blended learning is all about the practice and the tutoring happening in the class, whether that's sort of video, virtual, whatever it is. But this one is about that live, the live opportunity where materials are produced by the teacher and prepared by the teacher and accessed by the pupil at a later date. So you'd often find that in different digital platforms and environments that you create. So the next thing is, okay, so we're setting the scene on the criteria. If we look at impact, has Ofsted adjusted what they're looking at when they're looking at impact? No, they're still looking at the same things. They're taking into account the current climate, but actually the impact's unchanged in terms of what they're looking for. So they're looking still, have learners and are learners developing detailed knowledge and skills across the curriculum, and as a result, are they achieving well? Where relevant, this is reflected in results from national tests and examinations that meet government expectations, or in qualifications obtained. So that's a measure. And even in a situation where we are undertaking exams differently, assessments differently, where the structure for assessment of learning is taking place, we're still looking at what's the impact of the learning on the building and developing of learning and skills. The next one is about, are learners ready for the next stage of their education, employment or training? And this is interesting because this one really meets all of our learning and really important to explore. So where relevant, they gain qualifications, but where it's not relevant, are they going to the destinations that they expect? So are they going to further learning or work? Or are they developing further in their interests, their aspirations and their intentions on their course of study? So these are the kind of things that we're looking at. These are the areas where Ofsted will be kind of trying to transfer the current context to this. So interim visits revealed the following impact, and this is what Ofsted's findings reflected. That, no surprise here, centre assessed grades had caused a big challenge. 2, gaps in learning had emerged, including a loss of social and communication skills, which had become evident. Next thing they noticed is that practical work placements were a real concern for many, because young people or adults were not able to access the work environments as they were before a lockdown scenario. And the concerns were that the practical work placements weren't enabling them to get the skills they needed to fulfill their qualifications, their apprenticeship, and so on. Mental health and safety referrals on the rise, and we would have seen that ourselves. There has been a significant increase in the mental health and safety referrals during the COVID-19 circumstances that we've found ourselves in. Number 5 is innovative solutions to fix disjointed curriculum sequencing. So what's happened is we've had to stop, we've come back, there are gaps in skills, and now we've got to try and reconnect with the curriculum, change our sequencing to take account of the current context, and make sure that we revisit a logical way of delivering the curriculum that's going to have maximum benefit on the development of skills and learning of our adults, and where we do deliver to young people too. The second national lockdown prompted face-to-face provision reduction. So where we had some learners in and some learners not, that phasing has created some need for readjustment. And of course, we're not focusing on this one today, but the unforeseen financial pressures that still put a significant have a significant impact on resources that we can actually put into place to resolve some of these situations in the digital world. The ones we're going to focus on today are the gaps in learning, the mental health and safety referrals in the context of how we can support learners' mental health and have an impact, positive impact on their mental health and well-being, and the innovative solutions around curriculum and how we sequence it effectively so that we don't end up with too many gaps and that we get the most out of the learning that we can provide in a digital environment. So what I want you to do is spend a bit of think time really at this stage. You may be looking at this as an individual, you may be looking at this as a small group. So basically either individually or in your small groups. I'd like you to discuss and spend a little bit of think time just reflecting on these things. So the latest COVID-19 Ofsted report in their series reflected that leaders said that the curriculum had become disjointed, sequencing was not logical, with the difficulty weaving in practical elements of the curriculum into remote learning. The impact was gaps in learning, lower levels of achievement, and a drop in attendance for online sessions at lower levels. And I think that reflects our own learned experience during that phase. So let's just have a reflect on the following points. As leaders and managers, I want you just to consider how you've adapted your curriculum following the first lockdown. What skills gaps have you noticed that have emerged, and how did you address that? What methods in that worked really well in trying to reduce those skills gaps and enable learners to catch up? Did you do anything particularly different that others could perhaps learn from? What changes did you make to your curriculum in terms of sequencing? Did you front load certain activities when you were able to do some face-to-face if you were in that position in the autumn term? Were you able to actually adjust your curriculum, get the sequencing ready in case there were further lockdowns as we found there were? Did the changes that you made help to promote the building of knowledge and skills? Were you still able to see that learners were progressing through their learning journey, whatever they were working towards, whether that was in a practical course, whether that was in a course that was following somebody's interest? Did the changes help people to access their learning in perhaps a different way, without exclusion and in a safe methodology that enabled them to reach their aspirations and indeed follow their interests? And what evidence do you have to reflect that your strategies have worked? And I'm sure you've got plenty of examples, plenty of case studies that would reflect how what you've put into place has had an impact and it has worked. So have a look at what was the impact of those things that you've put into place. Consider what you might do differently in the weeks and months ahead, or what you would do more of, or perhaps what you would do less of. So just pause for a moment now. Reflect on those areas and start to just take time and take stock of what you have done and what you have achieved in the light of this, and then what you might do differently as well. Okay, so when we look at the shared learning of others, and I'm sure you will have identified some of these in your think time just then. So some of the shared learning from others was that online assessments were used to find gaps in learning. Practical assessments were done remotely through live streaming and recording. Working with businesses to provide resources for learners to use at home. So where we often find it difficult to fund the type of resources that we need, or maybe sometimes they're a bit specialised, or maybe sometimes they're just about ingredients needed for a task for catering. Maybe it's things like that. But working with local businesses, working with your business partners, and indeed the voluntary sector to provide resources for learners to use at home. Reordering the curriculum. So to respond to the current context, Did you do anything like front loading ESOL speaking and listening in face-to-face sessions when they were able to take place? Did you start to get some of the samples of learners' work much earlier than you would have done previously, in case we moved into another assessment scenario as we did previously? Did you look at doing some of the practical tasks up front so that when we move into other scenarios of remote learning, they already had the front loaded skills in place, and the impact of that was that you were now able to work and focus on the theory and some of the application of those practical tasks that they were able to do? Did you undertake any strategic review of the curriculum and consider how it was delivered and how you might deliver it in the future? And what planning actions minimised the risk of poor achievement levels? Again, this could have come into your reordering of the curriculum, but did you do a strategic review of the curriculum to kind of ascertain what that might look like and how you might deliver it differently and how you might plan to minimise those risks? If you did, then what were the things that you learnt from that? How could that be mirrored in other areas of the curriculum? Instead of block teaching, some modules are taught in every session to spread the weighting. So in some vocational courses, English and Maths was embedded into the vocational pathway rather than it being separated out. This then spread the weighting. It enabled the learners to connect more readily with English and Maths because it had a very practical application to it, and they could see the relevance of the English and Maths. To improve employment opportunities, many providers were offering employability skills courses, and I know lots of you are doing this. You're putting in place new employability skills courses that may be focusing on different skills from what you might have been focusing on previously, dependent on your local need. So enhancing the opportunities for getting people into work and demonstrating that you've readily adapted your curriculum and your planning to meet local need. That demonstrates the impact of your strategic thinking in meeting the local need with the demand that's currently placing itself in your local communities. So, some of the questions that Ofsted are asking and have been asking is, what actions are leaders taking to ensure that they provide an appropriate curriculum that responds to the reasonable needs of learners, stakeholders, and adapts to the changed circumstances? So can we evidence that we have adjusted our curriculum, taking into account the current context, focused on the kind of priorities that are coming along, and actually turning off some of the areas that aren't going to be appropriate in this current time to focus our resources on those areas that are in need? Can we demonstrate that? And I'm sure you can, because you're an incredibly resourceful and responsive sector. And I'd say you're probably better placed than most settings to be able to demonstrate that you are responsive. So take some comfort from that and take some time to reflect on what you have achieved and start to draw up those examples so that you can celebrate the evidence of what you've done and the impact of the steps you've taken. What steps are leaders and managers and staff taking to ensure that approaches used for building skills and knowledge are appropriate to meet the reasonable needs of learners? Again, how have you adjusted your curriculum? All of those things that we said in the last piece about how have you adjusted, what measures have you put into place, how can you demonstrate that you are helping to build interest, you're helping to build their skills, their knowledge, and also not forgetting the relevance of their confidence and their self-esteem whilst they've been isolated from the environment in which they've been used to in the past. Think about the impact you're having on keeping people connected and keeping people going during what has been a really challenging time. And how are leaders ensuring that learners are safe and well informed about potential risks, including from online resources? Now, I think you're way advanced in this area. So there's an awful lot of experience in the sector in keeping learners safe There is obviously the issues that are around that have emerged that we've had to learn more about, and how we consider online safety, of course, not taking that away from anything. Just remember that you are a caring, nurturing sector. You always have the safety of learners at the heart of what you do, as well as ensuring that they are taking part in meaningful learning and are able to progress or develop their independence or get skills for employability. Now, all of those things are really important, but just remember how you always do focus on the safety and welfare of not only your learners, but of your staff as well. So capture that. Remember the number of people that have told you that your provision has provided a lifeline, and that it has helped them through what has been an incredibly challenging time, and that you are community education providers who are making an absolute difference at a time when people need you the most. So what is working well in remote education? Ofsted made they've made lots of points, but here are 7 key points to perhaps consider in the what's working well in remote education. A little summary really. Remote education is a way of delivering a curriculum. So what they're saying is it's just a methodology of delivering the curriculum that you have established, and it is part of the issue and part of the solution, but equally it's not everything. Remote education and the platform's not everything, but it does matter the fact that you are continuing to deliver the curriculum in a different way. The second thing that says keep it simple. And in here, they talk about not adding too much content, not adding too much upfront, making sure that you keep it simple. Don't try and add too much information to everything all the time to try and get it all across in the same way, because people respond differently to learning online. So keep it simple and keep it straightforward, and don't try and overload it. Third point is about when adapting the curriculum, really focus on the basics. What are the things that absolutely they need to know, and how can we get that across to our learners in a way that enables them to relate it to their own interests, their own experience, their own learning, their own goals, their own employment aspirations, or aspirations for independence, etc. 4, feedback, retrieval practice and assessment are more important than ever. It's really critical to, to reflect back. So delivering a pack doesn't mean we've transferred knowledge. Sending an email doesn't mean we've transferred information and we're communicating. If somebody opens the pack, we're halfway there. If somebody opens the email, we're halfway there. But checking back to see if they have actually gone through those processes of reading the information, taking part in the activities that you've prepared, or engaged in Padlet, Moodle, whatever platform you have, Google Classroom, and Zoom. It's important that we keep on getting feedback from them, keep on trying to retrieve some of their learning, so that we are continually assessing where they're at. That will help us to identify the gaps more quickly. Then they say the medium matters, and then it's a bit. And what they're trying to say here is a little bit like the first point in a way, is that, yeah, okay, it is different, and we recognise that it's different, but is that in itself the issue, or is it that we're trying to transfer exactly what we did in the classroom to an online or a virtual or a remote learning context? And so what they're saying is it's about adjusting how you deliver your content to suit the medium, and then you'll get the most out of your curriculum content, rather than focusing too much on the medium that we're trying to deliver it through. Live lessons aren't always best. Now, the reason they're talking about this is around people not being able to engage because they may have other distractions. They may have small children that they're trying to homeschool at the same time as trying to take part in their own learning. They may have no access to digital device at that point in the day, or indeed at all. And Equally, they may have other barriers that are stopping them participating in live lessons. And equally, it's much, much harder to differentiate and keep up with that differentiation in live lessons. And it is quite exhausting for our tutors to continue to differentiate in a virtual world. However, live sessions go some way, but it doesn't always help people that need to return to the learning point. So sometimes having the balance between supporting material that backs up what happened in the live session, recording live sessions is also helpful, so learners can return to the points they may have missed, they may have got distracted from, or they may need further on because those areas need more in-depth explanation and support. Engagement matters, but it's only the start. So people might be attending, but are they actually present? And what I mean by that is, are they actually participating in the learning actively? And are they ensuring that they are taking the learning into account and then transferring that into the building of knowledge, skills, aspirations, and the interests that they want to pursue? There's the link if you want to have a look at that in more detail, which I'm sure you will. And the next one really is about, okay, so I want you to imagine this scenario now. You're reviewing the impact of remote learning in courses across one of these areas, and you may have another area you'd prefer to look at. But I was just thinking that maybe community learning, perhaps a general interest course, or a practical subject you might be delivering, maybe skills for life and work. Perhaps you want to choose English, maths, or ESOL rather than all of them. Maybe you want to look at a vocational pathway. Perhaps you want to look at an apprenticeship. Maybe you want to look at 16 to 19 if you offer any of that provision, or perhaps you're adults with learning difficulties and or disabilities. So if you're reviewing the impact of your remote learning, just focus in on one of those areas for a minute. I know they're still very broad areas, but just focus in on one of those areas and just consider, what methods will you or do you use to evidence the impact of remote learning on progress? And I've kept this broad because of the context in which we work in, which is very broad, and the scope. So I want you to kind of think about, it might be achievement of a qualification, but it might be about achieving their aspirations. It might be about development of their interests. So I want you to think about the methods that you use to evidence the impact that your remote learning is having on progress. And I mean this in the broadest sense of the digital learning. So all of the things that we looked at before, I mean this in the broadest sense. However you are delivering that learning on remotely, then consider that. So spend a moment just reflecting, pick an area. I know it's never easy. Pick an area and then just reflect on the methods you're using to evidence the impact of your remote provision or digital provision on learning and on progress. So consider in that how you would capture this for reporting in your self-assessment report. And of course, what actions you'd be putting into your QIP, your quality improvement plan, which would lead to further improvements. So spend a few moments, pause, capture your thoughts. Okay, so when Ofsted were reviewing the impact of remote learning, they reflected that some providers were assessing learners more regularly in preparation for teacher assessments. We talked about that a little bit earlier, and I'm sure that's what you're doing. Introducing more live sessions, as the evidence reflected that attendance was higher in live sessions because learners could interact with the tutor and their peers. And they recognised that what worked well were quizzes, polls, chat functions, breakout rooms for smaller groups, encouraging learners to use cameras, microphones, etc. Recording live sessions with relevant permissions and with safeguarding in mind, both for evidence and so learners could revisit and revise or catch up on sessions they might have missed. Measuring the impact of the use of multiple platforms. So many of you may be using multiple platforms. Some of you may be restricted by the platforms you're allowed to use. But what happened in terms of what Ofsted reflected in some providers was that the use of multiple platforms, some said it gave them extra flexibility, which enabled different learner groups to get the maximum benefit from that platform. And some reflected that it also promoted greater engagement. Some tutors, managers and leaders found it frustrating though, because it was difficult to measure the impact consistently. So what I've said in the implementation session was make sure you design quality measures when you're implementing your digital environments so that the measures are consistent, even if the way in which you're delivering it through the platform is different. Just secure your quality measures so that when you're measuring the impact, it is consistent. The next one is the use of remote observations of teaching, learning and assessment. And having a look at that, it's not everything, as we know, in measuring quality, but it's a measure. And what Ofsted reflected is that senior leaders and management teams with staff who've got responsibility for quality of teaching and learning were carrying out observations. Other providers described using work scrutiny, monitoring learners, progress at all levels, moderating targets that were set for learners, following up on whether the needs identified for individuals were being met, and the criteria for making judgments on quality of remote teaching, learning and assessment was still, they felt, at an early stage. If you want to look at the link, there's the link for those series. It gives you some briefing notes, which are quite helpful in what Ofsted saw, which I'm sure you're familiar with. It's just useful to reflect on those because it shows you and should give you some confidence in what you're already doing, because you'll look at that and go, oh yeah, we're doing that. Oh yeah, we've been doing that bit for ages. Oh yeah, we could do that. We can introduce that quite quickly. So I'm sure that this will give you a lot more confidence knowing that just having this time to reflect on what you are doing will build confidence to say, actually, we've got a lot of this in place. So the next part is really about mental health and well-being. So how do we measure the impact of that? From my experience, my learners quite often come and, well, they just come and tell me. So they'll wander in and they'll say, do you know what, this has been a real lifeline. One of my learners came in and said to me, I was really nervous about coming back. I wasn't sure if it was going to be a secure and safe environment. I nearly didn't turn up. But when I came in, everybody was so professional. Everything had been sorted out. I went to my session. I wasn't nervous and I felt safe throughout. And it feels like you thought of everything and I could focus on my learning, which in the lockdown was an absolute lifeline to me. And we need to catch that. I think in adult community education, we often forget to record all of these things, and we're really good at this health and well-being piece. So let's celebrate that, and let's capture it in creative ways and share the way in which people are communicating with us, how we have helped and supported their mental health and well-being. And equally, you're probably doing tailor-made courses that are focused on community well-being as well. So as well as capturing some of the feedback, which is really brings it home to you, the difference that you're making, also think about how your tailor-made courses are having an impact and how you may have embedded some of those courses into your other programs. So you may have shaken up your curriculum to increase the amount of focus on individuals' mental health and well-being as well, so that you are perhaps shaking up your curriculum a little bit in that way. One of my learners, he's 93, and before lockdown, he couldn't even open an email. He just didn't want to know and couldn't see the benefit of it. After the first lockdown, he came in and he did an iPad course, and he feared technology. And then he turned around to me and he said, after a few weeks, and after it was a good few weeks, but after we went into the second lockdown, He was then able to use his iPad to do his online shopping and connect with his family. That makes a significant difference to somebody who is socially isolated, cut apart from their family and friends. And his ability to be able to care for his wife in the way in which he did by doing online shopping was an absolute triumph. So we mustn't forget to capture these small case studies that really form the balance of what we do. The next part is about, okay, so we know that we know what the evidence is around lockdowns increasing the feeling of isolation and loneliness. We know that lockdowns, partial or full increase in the number of mental health referrals, welfare calls make a difference to attendance and well-being. They're things that we have learned during this exercise, and adult community education provides really very good at keeping up with managing the welfare of their learners. It's a caring and nurturing environment, as well as an environment that accelerates learning outcomes and the aspirations of many. And what I'd like to say really is that if nothing else, reflect on what you've achieved. This sector has achieved a great deal in transforming education and keeping people active and keeping people connected. It's provided a lifeline for many, and don't forget that. When you're thinking about the next stage, that's wonderful, but don't forget to reflect on the journey that you've taken and the amount you have done and the impact you have had at what is a very challenging time. You've created a caring environment. You've created a workforce that's dedicated and has given 110% to doing everything they can for their learners and for each other. Celebrate that. As soon as we can, let's celebrate that together. But in the meantime, just a little review of where you are now. And I hope that maybe some of this, maybe some of the learning from Ofsted and what they've found, you've been able to reflect on and go, yeah, we do that. Maybe some of the thinking you've been able to stop and just say, actually, we've achieved a great deal in that time. And maybe some of this has given you some ideas for things that you can implement in the future. So on your little scale of 0 to 10, where 0's not very and a 10 is, yeah, getting there. Have you moved? Have you travelled a little distance in that time? How confident are you in putting actions in place that will evidence how you are responding to changing needs? Remote learning is successfully building on knowledge and skills. How confident are you in capturing that evidence now? And how confident are you that your remote learning approach is having a positive impact on learners' mental health and well-being? I hope you've travelled a distance this afternoon, and I hope you've been able to see the impact you're having, the significant impact. And I hope above all things, it's given you an opportunity to reflect. Reflect on best practice. Reflect on what you're doing really well. So I hope that as a result of this brief session, you've been able to identify actions that will enable you to evidence the impact of your digital curriculum. That you'll also be able to consider approaches that will also enable you to demonstrate the impact your remote learning's had on progress, developing interest, and enabling people to achieve their aspirations. And I hope it's given you a starting point to capture the impact your offer is having on improving learners' health and well-being in the current context. And I'm sure you've already started that. I'm sure you're already doing these things. And now's just an opportunity to reflect on that. Just reflect on that and think about what a nurturing environment you've created, the lifeline you are to your community, the aspirations that you're able to help people to achieve. Think about all of these successes that you've already achieved. Spend time reflecting on that, and then start sharing some best practice that you can turn into next practice. Thanks for your time today, and I hope that's been a little bit useful to you. Goodbye from me, and good luck in the coming months ahead. Take care. Bye.